All right, here we go. Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar on best practices for those who are charged in their community with locating and securing housing units and building relationships with landlords. We're really glad that you could join us today. I do want to start by acknowledging the land that where I am within Kitchener, Ontario, I'm currently occupying the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral peoples. And I want to just give everyone a moment to thank and acknowledge the land in which they reside and occupy right now. So we'll just give everyone 30 seconds for that. All right, thank you. My name is Marie Morrison. I'm the Director of Built for Zero Canada within the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, and I'm your host for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Iain, who is the President and CEO of OrgCode. You know him as a leader, edutainer, coach, consultant, researcher, blogger, a positive disruptor, and relentless advocate for social justice. He has advised the federal government in the development of coordinated access under Reaching Home, and is a partner with us in by name listing coordinated access training and technical assistance. We are thankful to have Iain here with us today to present on the essential elements of this role that of course goes by many names like Landlord Engagement Specialist, Housing Locator, Housing Liaison, etc. Regardless of what you do call it, we know that this role remains an emerging and essential practice in the area of work to accelerate housing move-ins and to end homelessness. So he is here today to share tips and tricks and ideas for overcoming challenges. So Iain, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
All right, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping first, just to say that this webinar is brought to you today from the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, which leads a national movement of individuals, organizations, and communities working together to end homelessness in Canada. And that does include the 5 key initiatives that you see here. This by name listing coordinated access support for communities that is being offered through these webinars is funded in part by the Government of Canada through the CCI funding stream of Reaching Home. This webinar is part of a series of monthly webinars and community practice calls through the Canadian Alliance taking place between the fall of 2019 and March of 2022. And the calendar from May to August has now been released. And you can find all of the webinars and community of practice calls, both the ones that are up and coming and then the archived ones, on the CH Training and Technical Assistance website. And I just wanted to note that on May 27th, there will be a follow-up to this webinar, which is more of a community of practice call with a chance to meet your colleagues across the country and to engage in a conversation related to the successes and challenges of this role. And again, it will be myself and Iain Jong who will be on that call. And just to let you know as well that today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent out in a few days to everyone who registered, and will also shortly be included on the website, the TTA website that we just previously mentioned. Everyone on the call today is muted. I will be encouraging you to really use the chat to share your ideas and information, and you are of course welcome to ask questions throughout. I will be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A. And before we jump in, I just wanted to make sure you're aware of resources available on our website related to this topic. So under the program areas, there's a page dedicated to housing help and landlords. And what you will find on this page is a number of drop downs, including a previous webinar on this topic. There are resources to support renters, including renters toolkits and self-advocacy resources, Rent Smart certificate program information, as well as home takeover resources and flexible funding examples. That was that one. And there are resources to recruit and retain landlords, including toolkits and other resources, information regarding landlord mitigation and repair fund programs, and resources and examples related to head leasing. And there are also resources that communities have created to support landlords in this work. And also just want you to know that many people have identified that they have found this guide from 2018 to be very helpful. So just wanted to point that out, that that guide exists and that it is on the website, along with many other resources. So before we jump right into it, we wanted just to get to know a little bit more about you. So I'm going to launch a poll and just get you to answer a few questions. So we want to know if you have this kind of role, this housing specialist, landlord engagement locator type position in your community. How long have you had that position? What is your interest in this webinar, sort of where you're coming from? And how are things going related in your community related to this position? So I can see the answers starting to come in. I'll give people a little bit longer to answer, and then I will end the poll and show it so others can see what it looks like. All right, we've got 67 answered out of 120. And they're just still pouring in, so I'll give folks another 20 seconds. Is the polling anonymous? That is a great question. Oh, someone said my answers won't submit. Yes, the poll is anonymous, and I'm sorry your answers won't submit. I do not know why. That would be. I've not heard across that. If anyone in the chat has come across that before and wants to offer suggestions on why someone wouldn't submit, that would be great. All right, they're starting to slow down here. 95 out of 120, 96, 97, 10 more seconds. Oh, someone said, I tried many times and then it eventually did go through. You have to scroll all the way down and answer the question and have answered all the questions or it won't submit. Okay, folks, I'm going to end the polling now and show you what those results look like. Iain, can you see those results on the screen?
I can.
Okay, are all four of them showing or one at a time?
As long as I scroll down, I can see them all.
You can see them all. Okay, so we've got like 80% of people saying, yes, we have a position like this in our community, some variety of length of time with a good chunk, 33% having that in their community for 5 or more years, and about 20% or 10% that don't have it in. What's your interest in this webinar? So we've got almost half of the people saying, I actually hold this position in my community, and then a good number who are otherwise interested in this topic. And how are things going in your community? So a small percent going really well, like a 20% thing going okay. 45% is the biggest with some challenges, some a lot of challenges. Okay, so that just gives us a sense of who's here and what's going on in your community. That's super helpful. I'm going to stop sharing the results. And Iain, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Marie, and a very good day to everybody. Those of you in Eastern Time and in Atlantic provinces, good afternoon, and everybody else, good morning. This housing locator piece that I want to share with you today is a bit of a high-level summary of another piece that we've developed at OrgCode, but felt it was entirely appropriate for the conversation you want to have today, and I'm going to provide a slightly different spin on the content. So if any of you have checked out our resources on this historically, know that there'll be some similarities, but with some fresh perspectives on the particular matter of housing location, landlord relations, navigation of landlords, those sorts of titles. And also, I want to be entirely transparent that our approach to developing these materials was a bit of a groupthink. It got us to a place where we were connecting with organizations and communities, primarily throughout North America, that had seemed to be doing a good job on housing location. And we started from the approach of, what are your tips and tricks that we can share with others? We refer to this as legal larceny. Yes, some of the ideas are stolen or borrowed from others, but with their permission and understanding that it would be used to assist people like yourself who are engaged in the process of working with landlords, recruiting landlords, trying to increase the supply of housing for your particular programs in your community. And yeah, there we go. One of the things that is really obvious to me, it's a statement that I've made several times, is that they don't teach real estate in a social work school. And that in some ways is okay, and in some ways works to our detriment. If we have people who have just knowledge of how the frontline services work, they don't necessarily know the reality of rental housing business. So they can struggle at times to figure out what's the entry point of that conversation. On the other side of the equation, if we have people who just know everything about rental housing, but don't know anything about the population that we serve, it's difficult for them to have meaningful conversations around what supports actually look like and to generate the case for landlords to be participating with you in your program. The magic then of an effective housing location service is the overlap. Just enough knowledge of frontline supports combined with, I'll say, more advanced knowledge of rental housing business gets us to a place where we are leveraging the strengths of the specific knowledge that they have and how real estate works, but not doing it naively without appreciating the specific opportunities, strengths, and challenges that can come with housing the population. Now, that said, because many people who are in this position start from a frontline service support approach, there's opportunity to learn more around rental housing business works. And similarly, if you came at this just from a rental housing business perspective and know nothing about the population and services, there's an opportunity to learn as well. So all is not lost when we think about recruiting, but I would say in recruiting for the position, we definitely want to be thinking about both sides of the equation. How do we understand what happens on the front line, and how do we understand what happens in the business of housing? So some opening questions to kind of frame where I want to go today, and my remarks will leave ample time for questions today, and I look forward to the community of practice call towards the end of the month as well. But some questions that I put out there when doing this work is it possible to examine the landlord relationship as business rather than charity? In other words, is it possible to develop a hook, a proposition, an anchor point of discussion where landlords don't feel that you're just asking them to do you a favor? Can we actually help landlords look at their business operations and identify how working with you can help meet some of their business objectives, rather than them solely changing their business practices to meet your needs of trying to house people who experience homelessness? To do that, I think we need to be open and in the right spaces and places for landlords to teach us about how to work with them effectively, and to take that feedback in your local context and start to apply it to your program design in this space. Too often in our work of evaluating these sorts of functions within communities, we sense a lot of frustration, which is, I can't seem to get the landlords to get on board. And I always come back with, so did you ask landlords how to bring them on board? And the common response is, no, we never asked landlords how to get them on board. We just started with our pitch or our proposition or our anchor point and saw that they didn't engage and were at a loss. Is it possible to coordinate with other housing locators rather than being in competition with them for the same units? This is especially true in medium to large size communities. Urban and suburban happens to a much lesser degree in rural and remote areas, though it can still happen. But you might think of a community that has 3 or 5 or 10 or 50 housing locators. It's not efficient or effective to have them all operating in competition with each other. And it's also potentially problematic for landlord relations, where landlords get sick of or don't want to tolerate so many people that seemingly work with the same population calling about the same units. And to this end, it's been my experience that many housing locators, especially those that have been at it for the long part of a while, are very protective of their landlord contacts. They don't want to share them. They don't want to coordinate. And so it works to the detriment of the collective impact that we can have in making homelessness reduced and bringing it to an end in your community, driving it through coordinated access and the use of your by name list if we aren't sharing resources. So we're going to talk about what that looks like from a collective perspective. We also, in both a pandemic reality and a non-pandemic reality, need to consider what sort of events or initiatives are worth the effort to bring landlords on board. Some communities go to exceptional amounts of effort to have very low recruitment numbers of landlords. Other communities seem to have figured out less effort events, but better at actually generating leads. So we'll talk a little bit about that. What can low-income people that have never been homeless teach us about finding and securing housing? This is part of the secret sauce that has worked in every community that we've done a more detailed project of this nature on. There will always be experts in your community at penetrating the market. Those experts may not be you. In fact, those experts may be people with lived or living experience in finding housing in your current market conditions without ever experiencing homelessness and have the same income, the same presenting issues, just not the experience of homelessness. I'll use an example from the Ontario context just to illustrate a point, not because I'm trying to be Ontario-centric. But one of the things we had done in the community a couple of years ago to illustrate this point was, how many people currently have no fixed address in receipt of Ontario Works? Okay, now how many people are otherwise in receipt of Ontario Works? Now, can we actually map the data to see the general locations of people in receipt of Ontario Works? Now, can we go to those neighborhoods and talk to people who have never experienced homelessness but use Ontario Works as their source of income to understand how they found those landlords, how they found those leads? Just one example of leveraging the strength of people with lived experience, not because they've had lived experience of homelessness, but because they have the lived experience of living in economic poverty and finding, securing, and maintaining housing. Could we use existing housing stock differently? That's a great question in this space. Maybe there are opportunities to use 2 and 3 and more bedroom units differently. Maybe there's opportunities for rented houses, or depending upon where you are in the country, even mobile homes. Does it make sense to rely solely on online searching? That's where a lot of the magic happens. And there can be some great leads. How do we supplement that or even improve upon our online search techniques? Where can we tap into the landlords are already tapped into? And what incentives help with landlord recruitment? And that might be incentives to landlords, but it could be incentives to other people who bring you leads as well. So that's where I generally want to frame the thoughts and tips and suggestions that I want to provide today. And as I said, ensuring we have time for adequate questions at the end. So really 3 specific roles that we look for within this specific function. Yes, we need to recruit more landlords. We put a heavy emphasis on that. I'll say at times communities put too much emphasis on just recruiting, with that also focusing on sustaining existing landlords. If we don't sustain that which we've already added to our roster of landlords that'll work with us, we'll have to recruit even more. Whereas if we sustain, especially if we get leads or opportunities or even first right of refusal on future places for rent, those investments of time in sustaining relationships can actually decrease the amount of new landlords you need to recruit. And then the third function is the interface with housing supports, staying engaged in that place and space so that we know something about the experience of being in a landlord's buildings and can provide that sort of feedback to landlords as well in the process. So idea number 1 is the development of the business case. The business case in reality is can start from a different place than just starting to write it. I might suggest that a consultation with landlords is your first step in developing your business case in your community, whether you are a small, medium, or large size community. Doesn't matter if you have a handful of landlords to work with or dozens of landlords to work with. The questions are still valid and helpful in crafting your approach. What would make you appealing to landlords? I know we think we know what can make us appealing, but it'd be interesting to hear from landlords what they think would make you and your program appealing. The big steps to avoid: what has transpired in the past in organizations like nonprofits or government agencies working with landlords that has not worked out to the benefit of landlords, and how do we make sure that we don't repeat those mistakes? In terms of what rooms you need to be in to make the ask, and asking landlords, this is when you can learn that there may be formal associations or networks, but there's often informal associations and networks as well. Some of the places or rooms that you might need to be in aren't, the big functions that were held by the landlord association, but rather the small little get together that a group of landlords in one part of the city are having just to talk about business. And these days, a lot of that is still happening virtual. Getting your invite to those virtual meetings, even to get 10 minutes in their meeting, goes a long way. What do landlords not want to hear about or should be avoided? Now, this is not talking about leaving things out of the conversation or not being transparent. I've just found in some of the discussions with landlords is some of them have shared things like people go into long, drawn out explanations of who they serve and their model of care. And I don't care, says the landlord. I just care that I'm going to get paid and that the unit isn't going to be trashed and there's not going to be issue with other tenants. So maybe, getting some clarifying pieces from landlords. What do they want to hear about? What do they want to hear less about? What type of communication and what does that communication look like? So we can make assumptions on communication with landlords, hearing directly from landlords what communication makes the most sense for them, understanding all of their requirements, and in particular, framing it as requirements. And if you were going to have some sort of grievance process, what would make the most sense to the landlord and why, especially if your jurisdiction has some sort of quasi judicial body or entity that helps resolve tenant and landlord disputes or deals with tenant landlord legislation. Maybe we can come up with a parallel process that's it advantages all parties involved, not just the landlord, but hearing from landlords. So step number one, consultation with landlords, hearing what they would want out of you, hearing how they would like it out of you, what makes the most sense to them, what doesn't make sense to them. We can start to craft our business case based upon those inputs. In creating the actual business case, there's a handful, well, 6 kind of key elements that I've seen repeated in these business cases over time. The first is, what are the ways in which your program can normalize payment of rent or the revenue stream for at least a percentage of units that are within your care? So making sure that there's payment of rent could be that there's check-ins on payment of rent. It could be that your program has some sort of direct payment plan from income assistance to landlords. It could be in a position where rents are held in trust and paid out of the trust to the different landlords. But how do we make sure that we take care of that part of the essential function for landlords, making sure that they get their rent on time and in full? If you do have a damage fund, and there's a lot of careful considerations in damage funds, I'm not necessarily advocating for them or against them. I just think we need to be careful. But if you're making that part of your pitch, being really clear about how that works to the landlord's advantage, what types of damages are actually covered, without spooking landlords in your business case. If you lead with damage funds and give the impression that every person they house is going to damage the unit, but don't worry, we'll pay for it, that might also send landlords off on the wrong foot. Similarly, you can get things off on the wrong foot if landlords think that regular wear and tear are the sort of things that you're going to cover when you don't. Our business case should speak to how we can help, especially with larger landlords, property management firms, improving results on underperforming parts of their portfolio. They often will have some units or some buildings that have higher turnover or greater vacancy loss than others. How can we actually help meet that need is usually about outlining a process in the business case for landlords to identify those units to you and then you to take care of the matching function. And in the business case, outlining what do supports actually look like, when are supports provided, who provides the supports, what can actually be expected. So the real thrust of the business case is both financial and support or interactive components with you. On the financial side of things, that's the vacancy loss, the payment of rent, the damage fund, those sorts of things. The type of assistance and even things like the check-ins, those are the social dynamics that landlords aren't going to feel that you are just housing people in their units and leaving them be. That can often be a great cause for concern as well. Networking opportunities. In the networking opportunities, there are a number of different ways that we can engage with professional associations of landlords. And some of these ways could be full membership of you or your organization in the landlord association, even though you're not a landlord. There are some places that allow for at-large or interested members. You may have to pay your dues, but a few $100 a month to get you complete access to all of their materials and a network of landlords might be a great investment of those few $100. Landlords in some communities or broader jurisdictions, even like more provincial wide, can have conferences. Yes, some of those are virtual right now, but even virtual conferences these days, if you haven't been to lots of them, can still have conference information tables. Essentially, they're a type of breakout that people attending the conference can go see what's going on at those information tables. When we get back to physically gathering, this is the sort of thing where you might think about having your particular program featured and paying for that actual table at the conference, or asking if they'll provide you low cost or no cost access to a table to talk about what it is you're doing. That is going to be another entry point into engaging with landlord professionals. The checking in regarding existing tenants, we are strong advocates and have been for a long time that either you checking in with landlords or landlords checking in with you if there's non-payment of rent relative to specific tenants increases the communication pathway between you and the landlord, strengthens that bond even when there aren't issues because of familiarity and access. So that can be really helpful. And then we might also want to think about workshops designed for landlords. Now, a note of, I don't know, I was going to say caution, but it's probably more perspective. Don't just think of workshops that are intended to overcome the things you think landlords do wrong. Think of workshops that can also have considerable value and help landlords with their business. These could be small workshops and online workshops in the current reality. This will work in small communities, medium and large size communities. But what's a topic of interest to landlords? So if you can figure out what those are in your community and then deliver those workshops relative to it, it can be really helpful. I mean, one of the things that I've seen repeated uh, that has had great benefits in the landlords I've talked about is even explaining or doing a workshop that explains how home visits and supports actually work. So how frequently do they happen? What is a quote unquote typical type of agenda or interaction during the time with another person? What are we actually trying to accomplish through those? Can be really helpful for landlords to get a better sense of the program. There's also an opportunity for networking with other housing locators. It's going to require a few things. One is vulnerability. Am I willing to collaborate, not compete? Authenticity. Am I willing to be transparent with the information I have and be real about what's possible and impossible? And the last thing I'll say is a collective impact orientation. Some of us being smarter than one of us. This probably leads to conversations with your funder, CBO, service manager, system lead around how we go about tracking data for housing locators. I would be of the position that this is the sort of service we should examine as a community as a whole, as opposed to just looking at individual housing locators, because if we only prefer or celebrate housing locators for the volume of units that they bring on board, we might be in a position where we're unduly creating more competition than resolving it through collaboration. Aligning your business practices across housing locators. So one of the things that you might find to be helpful if you're in a community with more than one locator is doing a bit of a workflow exercise. How do you do the engagement? How do you do the follow-up? How do you do the lease up? How do you do handle the move-in? How do you handle the communications after? So that there's consistency, so that we have a housing locators approach where more than one of you exist in the community, as opposed to landlords having to keep each one of your business practices separate and distinct and remember them all. It also allows you to align your messaging. What are the things that we want to collectively be communicating to landlords, as opposed to what are the specific messages of individual agencies? I have seen communities that move towards sharing leads. I think that there's a lot of promise in sharing leads, but even more important than sharing leads, I think, is building warm transfers, introductions, and engagement with fellow landlords, or being really clear, I'm bringing this landlord, we'll call this landlord Marie, into the mix. So I'm going to continue to liaise with Marie, but I am going to liaise on behalf of all of us, so that you all don't have to liaise with Marie. But the benefits of having an engagement with Marie is that the units that Marie has available will be available to the entire community, not just my agency. And housing locators can also help support a landlord liaison committee and networking there, so that things like the conference table, it's your entire community's housing locators are represented, not just trying to pitch a specific project or program. Housing support professionals, because landlords are sold on the support services, we should also have some feedback loops to get some sense from landlords of how things are working or not working. We should also know from the support workers, so the case manager function or follow-up worker, or whatever sort of language is used in your community, we should have some connection with those professionals as well, to understand what sort of engagement they're having with landlords after the relationship is in place, and how we can strengthen those and follow up on rental payments that might be missing. And we should provide clarity and debriefing and understanding when there are emerging issues, who is being contacted. If we don't provide clarity to landlords when they're having issues with the tenant, and the clarity really being contact the support worker if it's issue A, B, or C, contact the housing locator if it's issue D or E, then landlords will get frustrated. They won't know who to contact. They won't feel that there's a harmonized action on the part of the response, and you'll lose landlords along the way. Advocate that you create a landlord liaison committee. The landlord liaison committee can also exist in communities small, medium, and large. Just the number of participants will depend upon the size of your community. But as soon as you have 2 or more landlords, you have the opportunity for a committee. Really critical to the success is creating an environment where landlords feel a sense of ownership over the committee and the agenda of the committee. Really let the liaison committee drive the agenda, as opposed to housing support professionals or housing search professionals driving the agenda. If we make it about them, we're more likely to have them come and participate in the meetings, and we're also more likely to hear their best thoughts of making improvements or amendments to our processes, rather than them feeling like we are there just to tell them how to do their jobs. We want to create an environment where they feel in support of each other, with the common bond of having housed our tenants in their buildings. If we meet 3 or 4 times per year, if we have a landlord committee co-chair, if we actually allow them to establish the agenda, or to at least frame most of the meetings, liaising with their colleagues who are fellow landlords who would be participating, letting them do a bunch of the recruitment of members to participate on the committee. And then we can bring in other people as well. to participate in the meetings as necessary. But really, the intended approach is for landlords to provide input and advice to the housing locators, and more generally to a housing program that interfaces with landlords, rather than just using it as the opportunity for you to tell landlords what's wrong with their buildings. So capturing more bees with honey, or whatever that expression is, start from a place where landlords can come and tell you how to make your work better, and then pivot towards suggestions that you make back, rather than just trying to bring landlords together to tell them what's what and what you want out of them. 3 to 4 times per year. You can also do these meetings online. We've attended a couple during the pandemic of these sorts of meetings online. If you do them in person, I think that there's also value to that in a post-vaccine, post-pandemic reality, but still keep it to 3 or 4 times a year, structured agenda, named membership, solid terms of reference for the committee, clear understanding of what we're trying to get out of it, and really what's in it for landlords. One place for them to come to communicate to all housing locators at once. That's a gift. In terms of the purpose of the committee, the exchange of information. What do landlords need to tell you? What do you need to tell them? We can also have information exchange from outside professionals when there's like amendments and tenant landlord legislation that could be available. Maybe there's other community-based resources to help out with specific tenancy issues, bringing that information to the table. Maybe we want to give 5 or 10 minutes for a new landlord that's entering in to share what their building and business model is. Different ways of exchanging information. A structured forum to hear about tenancy issues and opportunities. The structure, we don't want it just to be a complaint session. We really want to provide a structure where there's dialogue and resolution. So you might find that the committee helps from either having members that are strong facilitators, or occasionally bringing in colleagues who are stronger facilitators just to facilitate the structured forum. Problem solving common issues. If landlords are recruited to be participants because they are problem solvers and landlords, you can find that this works really well. If you lead landlords to the impression that they can come and that you will just fix the issues, and this is the forum for you to hear the issues, so you're going to fix them, probably aren't going to have success, because a lot of this will be a business to business or landlord to landlord conversation. So the sort of things that I've seen come up in an agenda of common and problem solving is everything from bed bugs to how landlords are dealing with furniture in the dumpster or near the dumpster, to conversations about lighting and safety lighting and security lighting, to modifications that have been made to windows so that people aren't jumping through windows to get to people's apartments, to amendments and alterations that they've made to like landscaping, trees, those sorts of things, so people can't climb it to get on balconies. I mean, letting landlords solve each other's problems is a lot different than just creating a forum for people to come and complain to you. Can also be used as an opportunity to celebrate success and increase landlord buy-in. You might think about very simple award structures. You can have a little bit of fun with it. You know, the second chance award to the landlord who gave someone a second chance, to the community-minded or civic-minded award, good neighbors award, going above and beyond award. Quite simply, positive PR. You might also bring in the likes of a mayor or other elected official, a member of your provincial legislature or parliament, or even your MP to engage in that sort of conversation, provide some recognition, show some landlords some love, give them a plaque, take a picture, they'll feel good. Some communities, housing locators have reached a point where they're like, I've used all the leads that I have. I've tried a series of like online connections. That hasn't worked. What we really need is a campaign. Campaign approach has been used in lots of different countries and jurisdictions relative to landlord recruitment. And they can include a whole bunch of different things. So a mayoral campaign, this is usually when the mayor decides to be involved in the recruitment of landlords, usually through some sort of video message or email. They're not heavily involved in the day-to-day, but The mayor as a figurehead speaks to the importance as a community, talks about the importance of landlords as partners, indicates that we are looking for more landlords to work with relative to our housing support programs, and who to contact. So it's really just using their celebrity or their status to increase the importance and the delivery of the message. Spokesperson campaign. This can be a community spokesperson. Maybe this is someone in the business industry, for example, that's associated with a United Way, or a sports figure, or a community advocate who's well known, but just someone who has some notoriety, hopefully for positive reasons. This speaks to the importance of helping people find places to live and looking for landlords to work with. Faith-based outreach and service club outreach are kind of similar in this way. You go to either online or in person when it's safe and appropriate to do so, but engage with the congregation. And it's usually not faith-based leaders, but with their congregation. The faith-based leader has given you the permission to speak to their congregation, usually at another gathering. And then you outline what you're looking for in rental accommodation, and you wait to hear from that service club or faith-based organization what leads they have. That can be really helpful for generating secondary suites, not quite as good at getting your medium to large size multi-unit residential property per se. You may find that that generates a lot of work for you on things like the habitability, whether or not it's a room for rent or if it's a self-contained apartment for rent in their home. So it can generate more work, but it can generate a lot of leads as well, especially if your values and the values of that service club or congregation are aligned in terms of justice, giving, supports, engagement. Mailouts decreasing in their effectiveness is what I'm understanding from some of the research that I've read just on mailouts generally, but there is still a tendency to do a big of a blast out or email out campaign to landlords and property managers. I will say take the time to do it right as opposed to do it quick. Things like spelling mistakes matter, grammar matters, graphics and visuals matter. Generating newspaper content or an online advertisement, but the newspaper content, especially story, it would be great to feature a landlord that is working great with you, getting them the publicity. Don't just make it about the people in the programs and how grateful they are that a landlord rented to them. That can quickly descend into poverty pornography. But if we keep it about the landlord and allow them to talk about their business and their engagement with you, it's a feel-good story, plus they feel positive about it. Or you might consider getting city council members involved. City council members can do a lot of work at the local level. They often have their own mail-out lists. They often know a lot of multi-unit residential property owners and managers within their jurisdiction. They often already have existing communication vehicles to those. So can you get a city council member to adopt this as an issue that they want to support and promote in their communications? Can also be really helpful and advantageous. At community meetings, this can be really helpful when there's already an existing community meeting structure, especially if there's high concentrations of rental properties. So you may not live in the community or directly work as in your place of business isn't in the community, but they still may have community meetings where they allow outsiders to come in and talk about initiatives. That can be really helpful. It also can be helpful in that space to help navigate other resources available to tenants or landlords so you can get your foot in the door. So don't just come with the ask, come with a bit of the answer. What can you provide to them? Why do you offer those things? What might be advantageous? Posters, one pages, and brochures. This is the sort of thing that you might want to put up, like looking for places to rent on a community bulletin board in a range of different locations. Having one pages of brochures that you can leave with businesses or offices of elected officials, put in elevators, that sort of stuff, and then stuff that you can easily share through existing listservs. Few communities that we've encountered have done this, but those that have say that it works remarkably well. Putting all of your information about engagement with landlords on one website with a dedicated email, so that when you're going out and you're making your pitch to landlords, if they want to look back on reference materials or look at some frequently asked questions, those sorts of things, you can steer them to a website. And that website actually has a dedicated email to a staff person who supports the website. This is also where some communities are moving into the space of identifying units for rent, as well as um, uh, just providing information to landlords. So a bit of a place for landlords to post in an alternate place if they really want to work with the population. And this is where you can also do some promo work. How many landlords work with you? How many units have you secured through these relationships? How many people are staying housed? Tell the story through the website, one central portal. Online searches. Don't worry, folks, I don't have long to go before I can take any questions we might have. So overnight or early morning searches on typical sites. The typical sites, the Kijijis, Craigslist, those sorts of things of the world, that can be really helpful, especially if we can get people in shelter settings on the overnight shift to do some of that searching for us. They've kind of laid the ground. Different sites refresh at different times or allow for postings at different times. So staying on top of some of that. But if early bird gets the worm, then making sure some of those overnight, early morning existing resources in your system can be doing some of the legwork for you. Sourcing leads through other sites, ignore home facts. I don't know why I left that there. It's a very American thing. But sourcing leading through other sites, this can really lead to a place where we understand more about market composition, how many rental properties there are within a specific geographic location, so you can actually think through your recruitment strategy that way. Local, often neighborhood-based Facebook groups in some suburban locations that I've worked with around big cities. This has been huge. Getting to those unusual places. A lot of it is secondary suites, hopefully legal and conforming. But the sort of thing where, like, we are an organization that is trying to help people find places to live in neighborhoods like yours. If you or someone you know has an apartment for rent, please hit us up using that kind of Facebook platform to share the message, share the process, generate leads, and follow up. And then organizing the search results. This is most helpful and impactful if you do this across all housing locators. If you have more than one housing locator in your community, dumping it all into one spreadsheet and then allowing for filter information as opposed to looking at each individual ad. This will improve some of the comparators, but also if you were the sort of person in this work that's trying to house the person, not just trying to find the landlords, you probably do need quick, easy access to, okay, well, I'm looking for 1 bedrooms or bachelors. I'm looking for this price range with utilities included that are pet friendly, that are accessible, that are in the east end of the city, that's in a building with an elevator, that's available June 1st, and here's everything else that's known. You kind of create one mastermind spreadsheet and filter your results from that. Much more efficient, especially if we all commit to updating it as units are taken off. Otherwise, it just becomes a bear real fast. Leveraging expertise from existing low-income tenants. So on the ground, speaking with low-income tenants, I talked about the Ontario example, doing some mapping, knowing which community to go to the bus stops, to go to the no frills, the food basics, to talk to people, essentially trying to find out, how did you find this place to live? How do they get by month after month? Do they know of any places for rent in the neighborhood? Do they know which landlords may be interested in renting to low-income people? We're not trying to take away anything that they've done or disrupt. So I want to be really clear. If they don't want to share information, I don't want to push people, but I do want to create a space where they can share this information with us, and we're leveraging that expertise. We may also incentivize that through the likes of a gift card for information. Maybe holding a modest community event, especially in a post-pandemic world. But this is like outreach to a community room or nearby park of existing tenants in the neighborhood and offering some sort of incentive to help you become aware of vacancies as they rise up. Shared housing and roommates has to be part of the service delivery conversation in communities throughout the country where housing is just simply not affordable to the rates of assistance that people have. And we should develop an actual plan and strategy for roommates as opposed to just doing it haphazardly or ad hoc based upon the person. We do have to make sure that landlords will rent to unrelated people in the same unit. Some sort of matching framework is going to be necessary, and agreements are going to be necessary. You'll have legwork to do on that part. But then we also have to share what and educate people on shared housing and what it actually means and how it's different from a traditional roommate situation. We could also look at renting a house with multiple bedrooms. This again only happens in communities that zoning and local laws allow for it, but there are places that allow for single dwellings to be used as multiple individual rooms with separate agreements. So we can look at that. And then we should use our knowledge of existing house program participants, especially if you can incentivize it through some sort of honorarium, but asking people that are already housed and already supported to keep their eyes and ears open for potential leads and being transparent what they get if it turns out that someone else can rent accommodation. So grocery gift card, cash, something of that nature that is really helpful. And you can also create meaningful daily activity out of this if you offer, let's say, a 2 or 4 week session on how they should go about doing this. But it is an opportunity for some people you supported to give back in a different way, especially if they were interested in giving back or had expressed interest in giving back. I wouldn't bring this up with people who haven't expressed interest in having more activities or wanting to help out others in a similar position. And I went a little bit longer than I was planning. I'm sorry about that, but we'll open it up to questions, and we'll use our remaining 6 minutes to hear whatever questions or comments people have. And remember, we also have the community of practice call towards the end of the month that we can get deeper into conversation then as well. Marie, I turn it back over to you.
That's great. Thanks, Iain, so much. So I am just checking out here in the chat and also in the Q&A, and I see a couple of questions have just come in. So do you have a webinar on how to match roommates successfully in private market rentals?
We do not have a webinar on that at this point. We have done work on that in some communities, but it's never been adapted into a webinar.
I would say on the website that I showed you, on the Waterloo Renters Toolkit, and in some of the other communities Renters Toolkit, there might be sort of tip sheets or ideas and some information on, roommate agreements and things like that. Hi, Iain, great to hear your voice again. We've tried the survey to low-income tenants for info on how they got their unit. Can you refer me to a community who has had success with this, as they didn't have much success?
Yeah, I can. I'm not going to out communities without asking them first, but if you want to follow up with an email with me, I can check with the communities. If they're interested in sharing what they did, I'll put you in contact with each other.
All right, if you have a question for Iain here. Wondering if the webinar will be available left to watch. Yes, it will go out to everyone as a recording and also a PDF of the slides. Here's another question. If we tried to facilitate a unit referral program in the past with tenants of our program without success, would it be reasonable to try again this time with a more developed system and a financial incentive?
I think so. I think that one of the things, and this comes from an evaluation that I did last year during the pandemic, but where the program seemed to be really successful was framing it as a meaningful activity for people who wanted to give back to the program. So it was kind of framed that way. It brought in a different type of tenant or client participant than what they had got historically. And they did a really good job of supporting both skills development and access to incentive or honorarium. I think it was incentive in their instance, but also using it as a springboard for talking about other meaningful civic participation, engagement, and ways of people volunteering if that's what they want to do. So it was part of a broader approach, and I think there was probably something very meaningful about a broader approach as opposed to just asking existing tenants to help find units.
Great. Have you developed a good job description to hire the right staff person, the skills, education, background? Thanks.
So I don't have these positions with me anymore. When I did direct service, there certainly had some positions. That might be a great question for the community of practice call, and getting people to share some of their job descriptions with each other. And then we could probably, or you all could probably pick and choose the elements of job descriptions that make most sense for your community.
Yeah, that's great. And we have had a lot of people ask about job descriptions, and we'd love to get some examples to post up on the site if people are willing to share. May we use the presentation slides within our own communities as a starting point to create future tenant relation committees?
Well, I don't see why not.
Can we use this model with LL who are renting their basements, landlords?
So yes, I will definitely say you can use it with landlords who are renting their basements or attics or any part of secondary suites can definitely be used. Just the amount of investment and time with landlords can be different. And so you might even want to think about your process of landlord liaison committee being different for those who are smaller landlords versus those who are corporate landlords.
That's great. And folks will see I have just launched the sort of the wrap-up poll for you to give your feedback while we just answer some of these final questions so we can wrap up in 2 minutes. Damage fund, you mentioned it is tricky to communicate. Is the info on the Built for Zero site the best info we have around damage funds? It's the best info I have, because everything we have we've put up on the site. But Iain, I don't know if you have any comments to that.
I don't know what I have specifically on that other than one thing that comes to mind. So let me see what else I have, and I'll see if it's stuff you already have on the website or not.
Okay, that's great. All right, just looking for any final questions coming in as people answer the poll. We just have like 30 seconds left, but do you want to say a little bit about how you imagine our community of practice call might go?
It is going to go well. I don't even have to imagine that part. But I do want to be posing some specific questions back to generate common learning, sharing, and understanding. So things like the job description conversations, getting deeper into some of the conversation around how does like engagement with existing tenants work, or how does community engagement work. We can go deeper into some of those themes. And again, facilitating more of what you are already doing rather than just listening for me, community of practice, but facilitating dialogue across professionals, unlike the webinar where I was driving a lot of the content. But we'll use some of the themes from the webinar to frame our discussion.
That is amazing. Is there data about the kinds of landlords who are engaging in housing first partnerships, i.e. large, small, or medium landlords?
I don't know any of that data. It could exist, but I don't know it.
Okay. That's great. Well, I think we're at time. We're going to need to wrap up. I really want to thank everyone for being on the call today. A big thank you to Iain for all of the information you shared, and we look forward to all of the housing landlord locators and engagement specialists and whatnot being on the community of practice call later this month. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye now.